rights.
Okay, so do you support animal rights?
100%, yes.
And why do you support animal rights?
I think the basis of rights is, the ability to feel, the ability to think, anything that's living should have rights, and animals live.
Okay. And does that apply to all animals, from a cow to a fly?
Absolutely, that all of them are living, so all of them have rights.
And so should they all be protected with the same protections?
100%.
Okay. And would you say human rights are trump animal rights, or you say they're on an equal footing, or one's below the other?
No, equal footing. You can have different rights for different species, but that doesn't mean that any of them are, in this hierarchy. Like human society, like the right to vote, for example, might be a peculiarly human thing that humans have the right to do, but that doesn't mean that right is more important than any animal right. The right to life, to love, anything like that.
Okay, and which of the animal rights would you say is the most important?
Just the right to life and freedom. Just kind of very base, the right to non-interference, I guess you might call it.
Okay, and when it comes to, do you think the same principles apply to human rights? Hang on, let's go one question back, which is, okay, animal rights, the right to life, the right to freedom, etc. When do you think that right should when should that right start to be recognised in law? So at what point in the animal's life should it start to be recognised?
That was loud. I would say, from when the animal is born. Obviously we can legislate for humans. We know humans inside out. We don't know animals inside out just yet. Right now I'd just say from birth, if the mother wants to carry the child through to term, then, absolutely.
Okay, so what about say a chick that's inside an egg and it's not hatched yet? Do you think that chick has any rights?
Yes. So in the context of it's human interference, isn't it? That oftentimes interferes with that chick's right to life or to potential life.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So applying this stuff to human rights, do you think we should apply the same principle, say, to an unborn baby in the womb?
No, it's a different context. The egg as this growth formula isn't alive. There's no consent from the egg because it simply cannot consent. In the case of the person carrying a child, their consent is valuable. It's their consent, it's their body, their life that's keeping that child alive. So that consent is the overriding right there.
Okay, that's interesting. But when we started the conversation, you were talking about the kind of inalienable rights of all living creatures, many of whom can't really consent in any cognitive capacity. Why is it not okay to kill them, but it is okay to kill an unborn baby who, by some criteria, is on the same kind of footing?
So I'd fundamentally disagree with your kind of language of killing there.
What do you think abortion does to an unborn baby?
It terminates a pregnancy. That's what an abortion does.
Can I show you a 1-minute video of what an abortion procedure looks like?
I've seen it before, but you can show it to me again if you would like to.
Sure, I'd love to. Thanks, Nathan. Okay, so bear with, I just need to load this up.
No, absolutely.
Okay, so the only problem is glare. Okay, here we go. Okay, so whenever you're ready, if we just come over in the shade. Okay, cool. Whenever you're ready, just press play there. Warning, it is graphic. So that's 10 weeks. That's 12 weeks. That's what's known as fetal assembly, to make sure the fetus is out. This is 15 weeks. And this is 24 weeks, the current UK limit. Did you finish? So having watched that, Nathan, would you say that's not a living entity?
I'm not disagreeing with you that there is a potential life there. There could be a human or another being there at all, but that's not the point in which I'm arguing.
So I don't want to mischaracterize you. Going back to your initial argument, so how would you justify the protection of all animals, but not the protection of unborn babies that you just saw?
Well, if you want to take that, you'd be completely violating the right that a person has to consent to having that pregnancy, any being carrying that pregnancy through to term. That consent is part of the inalienable right to non-interference that I'm talking about.
But animals can't give consent, and you're saying that we shouldn't interfere with them. Unborn babies can't give consent. Surely, by extension, we shouldn't interfere with their lives either.
That's a different point I'm making. Maybe I haven't clarified that enough. I'm talking about, the person who is carrying the pregnancy, their consent. I can't speak for animals, obviously, so I won't speak about animals. But for humans, we can clearly recognize consent given by the person carrying that pregnancy through to term. And, to say what they can or cannot do with their own body is an absolute violation of their right to choose what happens to their body. So now, at the moment, when the pregnancy is carried, some people might say it's parasitic and that it can only live independent on the body. So in, that pregnancy, it is already kind of interfering with that body, and if the individual gives consent for their body to be interfered with, that's absolutely fine. But when they withdraw that consent, that interference with the body of the person carrying the pregnancy is violating that right of non-interference.
But having just seen that video, would you say that that was a parasite?
No, I wasn't saying that. I was saying some people might, say it's parasitic. And the definition biologically of a parasite as being something that leeches on a host and can only survive when it's attached to that host.
Yeah, but you and I would agree that that's not what an unborn baby is.
Well, the baby is surviving by virtue of the pregnancy, yes?
Yeah, so it's surviving from the mother's umbilical cord being fed nutrients by her.
So would you not agree that that is an interference with the mother's body, with the person who's carrying the pregnancy's body?
Well, I guess it is an interference, but in 98% of cases in the UK, that interference has occurred as a result of consensual sex, in which both parties had consented in what was a loving or lustful act to have sex, and then another human being's come into existence. Well, and that species is the same species as the mother. It's growing inside the mother's womb. It's not an invader in the sense of being a parasite.
Consent is not a single act. It is ongoing. It is agreed. It's freely given. Two adults, they may have consented to having intercourse, and there is a fetus. But the consent is ongoing for that fetus to be living, inside that body and interfering with the body that it is inside.
But how can how can you suddenly retract consent on a unborn baby that doesn't, what you're ultimately arguing for there is consent to kill. It's consent to kill.
It's not.
It is, because that's what the procedure does, as you've just seen. It stops a beating heart.
What I'm talking about is the consent for interference with the body of the person carrying the pregnancy. That is the consent we're discussing here.
Okay. So, in summary, totally support animal rights. You think all animals should be protected in the womb, but an unborn baby shouldn't deserve those same protections because ultimately the mother's right to choose trumps that.
No, I'm not saying
life.
that. I'm saying hypothetically, if we could, have that clear consent, in the animal world, and we could understand that, and an animal carrying a pregnancy didn't want to continue with the pregnancy, it would be perfectly permissible for them to not carry that pregnancy and for the pregnancy to be terminated. But at the moment, we can't talk about consent in that way. We can't, solidly say that we know when an animal is consenting.
Would you say
with humans we can? So that is the critical difference we're talking about here.
But when you say at the moment, can you envisage a world where kind of, cows or cats start going to abortion clinics and consenting to abortion?
It could hypothetically happen. I know I'm a philosophy student, I'm not a scientist, but we can't rule it out as a possibility. All we can say is that for now, we don't know enough to do that. We don't know enough about consent within animals to talk about that. But with humans, we absolutely can.
Thank you for your time. And
thank you.
Have we got you thinking today?
Yeah, it's something that I always think about, as I say, philosophy student of religion, it's my bread and butter is thinking about this all the time, basically.